Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our informational webinar on the Regional K-16 Education Collaborators Grant Program. We are excited that you're able to join us today to learn a little bit more about this unique program and funding opportunity that is coming up. And today, what we have for you is an overview of sort of the idea or the vision or where this program came from. And then also we're going to give you some information on the current program status and some ways that you can follow and prepare applications if you do want to participate in the program. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the governor's office, and Ben is here with us today to give us a bit of the big picture view for the program. So Ben.
Thank you, Barbara, and hi, everybody. If you don't mind, Michael, if you could turn on I'm not sure if we're presenting the deck yet, but we have a couple of slides to share with the audience in terms of just some of the strategic context and some of the purpose and rationale and thinking behind this grant program. So Michael, if you can go to the third slide, I think, the next slide. Next one after this. So I'm going to start by just describing a little bit about some of the strategic context, some of the thinking that went behind this K-16 collaborative and where it's situated and when the overall sort of vision and plans around the administration, the legislature, and our various partners. So what you're seeing here is actually a very early sketch. It's not perfect, so please don't sort of use it and rely on it too much. But it's an early sketch that we used as we were developing some of the plans for the budget investments in this last budget's sort of education strategic investments that we made. And so what you're seeing here is sort of a map from cradle to career, in a sense, from early childhood all the way through to workforce. We were trying to really align a lot of our investments so that they were harmonized together. And I think one thing I really want to emphasize here is the sort of cross-segmental nature of some of these investments. And those are very deliberate, and that includes the K-16 collaboratives. We really want to, big picture, break away from the idea of centering our systems and our work around how institutions happen to kind of develop historically, and instead think really hard about the lived experience of each individual child or family moving through our systems and try to center our supports around them. There's two here in particular that I've put little red boxes around, and I want to really highlight them as examples of some of the big picture sort of structural reforms that we're really trying to advance, in addition to sort of more discrete policies that we're trying to drive. So on the rightmost here, you see transitioning regional economies. This is a separate program called the Community Economic Resilience Fund, or SERF. But it's very connected to a lot of this work, and it's kind of, I think, a good grounding point for us, because it's really sort of what we're aiming towards. So we have all this work, what are we trying to accomplish here? And so this box around transitioning regional economies is speaking to an investment that we made that essentially would, over time, create community level collaborations to essentially plan out the future regional economies of 13 regions across California. And the idea is, we all know that, regional needs, that economic needs change over time. But we also all know that our fate and our future is not something that happens to us, but something that we enact ourselves if we kind of grab hold of it ourselves. And so the idea is for stakeholders at the community level, on the business side, on the community side, on the educational side, to all collaborate to envision for themselves what they think the future of their sort of region is, so to speak. That, to me, is in many ways sort of the starting point for a lot of this other work, because it's kind of the strategic objective against which we will kind of backwards plan all of our systems, in a sense. One example of that is these regional collaboratives, as you see here, which is really to start aligning our education systems and our workforce systems to ultimately feed into and advance and ensure are successful the sort of the future regional economies that we're really trying to cultivate here. Just one last note on this, again, is, what you're seeing on this chart is investments of all different flavors. Some of them are near-term, immediate relief especially following the pandemic. Some of them are sort of temporary in nature with regard to this exact situation that we are in. But many of them are intended to create the long-term pathway to hopefully not only get out of this current moment and make sure our people are supported, but also in the long term, ensure that our institutions are founded on the right strong, durable foundations that are going to make sure that our communities are successful. Michael, next slide, please. On this next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of the collaboratives within that overall vision and that vision for trying to kind of make sure that institutions are wrapping around and centered on our students and families. So the collaboratives, it's about, TK to 12 school districts. It's about post-secondary. Can you go back, Michael, please? It's about post-secondary institutions. It's about employers and community stakeholders. The idea being, I think just skipping to the why of it, we know that collaboration takes work. It's not, something that people easily talk about. They say, we should just collaborate. We should all talk to each other. We should be breaking down silos. But that stuff doesn't happen by itself. It doesn't happen for free. It doesn't happen without hard lifting and hard work on the part of, frankly, thousands and tens of thousands of community level leaders. So what this fund is what this program is $250 million in grants to fund targeted partnerships between these different groups and these different local leaders to do really two categories of things. And we'll talk a bit more about the specifics, but they're really kind of fall in two buckets. Bucket number one is improving specific supports for students and families. There's sort of a menu of options, so to speak, of really high priority supports that we think are valuable and will really be good game changers. But there's a number of different ways in which these participants in a collaborative would work together to improve supports for students and families. And the second one is sort of the why or what the strategic objective is for those systems, which is really to kind of try to align as best as we can these TK to 16 or K to 16 systems towards not only the jobs that will be fulfilling and durable over time for the students who are moving through the systems, but also those that are on the macro level going to really be supporting the future of a healthy community, including climate justice and including making sure that our education, we have a sufficient number of classified and certificated employees in our schools, ensuring that we have enough care workers and healthcare and elder care and child care and these things. So really it's about kind of both improving the experience of moving through our system, but then also systems, and then also pointing those systems towards our best bet for a strong future for California and our own communities. And again, why? It's because this stuff doesn't happen by itself. It doesn't happen just because we asked you to. It takes real concerted work. So the idea is over the next several years, a lot of the investments that I just kind of mapped out for you are going to play out in various different silos and various different ways. And every now and again, you'll see a headline and be like, oh, that's cool. But really what we want to do is, have a more concerted and more organized and coordinated and aligned effort than that. And that's what these collaboratives are really intended to do, is build these tables, create these spaces in which you are building, we're having conversations and building relationships across the critical leaders who are ultimately going to be driving this work, the sort of people infrastructure, so to speak, that is going to ensure that our communities are set up for success in the long run. So that's really the sort of thinking behind these collaboratives. Michael, if you'll switch to the next slide, the next is just an example of some of the existing models. This is not work that is new to many of you or to many communities. Frankly, there are many, many communities that have already taken the initiative, without money, without additional work, taking it on as like extracurricular workload to build these relationships and to kind of, and to actually try to create this coordination at the local level. So there's tons of activity, tons of energy that's already existed. The one example I'm just going to note here, sort of an example that would give you a flavor of what we had in mind when we were talking about these collaboratives was, one example is the Fresno K-16 collaborative. These folk, this is a set of local leaders. Like I said, it was organic. Before the Newsom administration even came on, like they were already working on this stuff. They were already thinking about these things. They were already talking to each other. So it's a multi-year organic partnership between different education leaders. A lot of their focus has been on data sharing, dual enrollment, student supports, employer partners. And really what they've been working on is any number of ways in which to build relationships and convene key partners to successfully kind of drive implementation of some of these career pathways. And so that's really just a one example of many. But, again, just big picture, we have all of these historic investments that are coming in. It's going to be exciting to see them play out from cradle to career. It's going to be really a moment for us to not only get out of this pandemic, but also be on much better footing structurally to enact California's future. And so it's going to be an exciting moment for the next several years as we implement this stuff effectively. And really the point of the collaboratives is to recognize and acknowledge the people investments that we need to make to drive these collaborations and this alignment over time. And that's why I'm so excited that you all are here joining us, because this work is so critically important. Because as we all know, working in government or another contexts, being successful and creating a positive impact for our people oftentimes comes down to relationships. It comes down to communication and people sharing with one another. So this is exciting that you are here and you're excited about that, because we're going to need a lot of that partnership and that collaboration for the years ahead to make sure that we're successful in all of these across the board. So really appreciate you joining. I'm going to hand it back off to Barbara, I think.
Thank you, Michael. If we could go to the next slide, please. So we've been getting a lot of questions about how this works and how everyone can apply for this grant and what people can be doing right now to prepare. So we're just going to kind of give you a little update over the next few slides to let you know where all of that is at. And then just starting with, well, where is this program? Where is this housed? So this program will be administered by the Office of Public School Construction. And our office has experience with a lot of the K-12 grant funding that goes for school construction. So there is also an opportunity for a third-party administrator to come in and provide some additional assistance as well. So there has been an RFP that's gone out to seek a third-party administrator to assist with this program, particularly in the areas of the higher education systems and that workforce piece that perhaps OPSC does not have as much experience with. And that solicitation did actually close yesterday. And so those bids are being opened today, and OPSC's plan is to get that contract awarded quickly so that we can get to work on getting this grant out there for everyone to participate in. And then if we can go to the next slide. So next steps, if you are thinking about applying for the grant. So once the third-party administrator is under contract, we will be having some stakeholder meetings. We will be doing them probably in this webinar format as well as webcasting them. So we would love to get participation in the grant development process. So we will be doing those as public meetings, and we're expecting those to take place in January and February. They're going to move pretty quickly so that we can get this opportunity out there. And the timing of the grant filing period we're expecting right now to be in spring. So somewhere in March, April 2022, with the awards being announced in May 2022. So this is going to move pretty quickly over the next few months. Next slide, please. We've also gotten some questions about what you can be doing now to start preparing for that grant application. And there were some things that we thought might be important now because they may take a little bit longer. So on the website, we have a listing of the full criteria and statute for the grant. We will be having those stakeholder meetings that will help determine what this grant application looks like. But a couple of the things that you may want to start working on now, if you don't already have these relationships built or these connections in your community or your areas, you need to have certain components on the collaborative. So you need a K-12 school district, a University of California campus, a California State University campus, and a California Community College district. So those are some partnerships that you can be reaching out and establishing those connections and building those relationships and seeing if you have got partners that are interested in forming this collaborative with you. And then also looking at your steering committee that also is going to ensure some local employers as well. So you may want to be reaching out in those areas also. So those are some things that you could be thinking about now as you prepare for the grant application. And then, of course, looking at the rest of the criteria will be helpful. So you have an idea of what's expected throughout the grant process and what the milestones are going to be for this program. And then on the next page, next slide, please. We do have some other resources that you may want to take a look at. You can do some reading and studying to see some of the points that actually been raised earlier, some of these other programs. In a second here, I'm going to show you the website that's on OPSC's page right now. We have some links to this information, but when you're thinking about your grant application and how you want to form your collaborative, you also want to take into consideration these other concepts that Ben was discussing earlier, such as the Cradle to Career system and the Community Economic Resilience Fund, and then also taking a look at the Recovery with Equity report that was done in February 2021. And you'll be able to find links to resources for all three of these areas on the webpage as well. So that's a good starting point. And if we could go to that next slide, please. So there is another way, and many of you may have already joined that, and that's how you got here today to this webinar, but we have established a email list so that you can receive program updates. So if you sign up for this email list, then when we have things such as this webinar, or when we have additional stakeholder meetings coming up here in January, February, when the grant application becomes available, if we do reminders or if there's additional information, we'll put this out to our email list so that you have this information. So you don't have to keep checking the website. We'll make sure that this email goes out to everyone once it's available. So you can do that, and you just check the box down there and you sign yourself up and you start getting those emails. And then on our next slide, so we also have the website that is dedicated to this program. So this is under OPSC's webpage under services. And so you're going to be looking at services and how to access the regional K-16 Educational Collaboratives Grant Program. So here's where you can be watching right now to get the latest information on the programs, on the program development. And then it's also on this page that you're going to find those links to the other programs that we were just talking about. And then with that, I think that takes us to our Q&A session. So if you do have questions for today, we are in a webinar format, so please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom, and we will look for the hands and we will enable you to unmute yourself, and you can go ahead and ask any questions you have at this point. Before we turn over to questions, Ben, did you have anything else you wanted to add on?
Oh, looking forward to the questions.
Great. Okay, let's see.
You got 3 in the Q&A. Can a K-12 County Office of Education apply?
Yeah, I'll defer to others in case there's any sort of limitation, but well, Barbara, do you want to?
So we, on specific application requirements, I'm not sure that we'll do definitive answers today because we are still in that grant development process. So these are questions that if it's specific to how this application is going to work, we're looking at the statute for the collaborative program, and then also we're going to be doing the grant development here in actually just a few weeks at this point. So these are all things that we will want to take a look at as we are developing that grant application. So that one, a little bit more to come on specifically who can apply and any of the more detailed application questions. We'll probably want to look at that in more detail as we get a little more information on that process as well.
Thanks, Barbara. And I would encourage folks, especially in terms of the steering committee, to determine whether or not it's good to identify County Office of Education. You know, they, as you all know, they play a really critical role in coordinating a lot of work across the county. So I think that they would be truly helpful partners in trying to coordinate all of the K-16 collaborative work. So that's all to say. I think it's, I'm not sure in terms of the application process exactly where they should fit in terms of compliance or eligibility, but in terms of partnership and who should be in the conversation, I certainly would encourage the county offices and superintendents to be part of that process.
Next question, with respect to the partnerships As a K-12 district, we must partner with one UC, CSU, or community college, or link up with all three.
I can go ahead and address that one. So that one we have pulled out as part of the makeup of your collaborative, and you do need all three. So all three, and then also take a look at those steering committee requirements too, because you're going to need some local employers involved in there as well. I see some questions about dropping the links in the chat. I think we did just put the email link in the chat, and we will go ahead and get over. We've got a couple other links on the website. We can add those too. And I see a question about if there is a limit to the grants. So there's $250 million for the program. The specific grant amounts have not yet been determined. So that is also going to be part of the grant application development process that's coming up in the January-February time period. I'm not quite sure I'm catching all of these in order, but will the slides be available from this session? Yes, so the slides are actually posted on the website for the Office of Public School Construction right now. Right now we are in, so the OPSC website, it's www.dgs.ca.gov/OPSC. And then if you go to the meetings tab, that's where the slides are right now. And it looks like Michael has just dropped that into the chat for us. Thank you, Michael. Let's see here. We had a question about, can K-12 school districts be the lead and apply? So as far as lead applicant, again, that's going to be another more specific question towards the grant application process. And let's see here. Sorry, just looking for the ones I see a question here about, will UC CSUs be able to partner with more than one collaborative that is applying for funds? That's a good question. So these are regional. There could be a possibility of some overlap. And I think that's definitely something that we're going to want to discuss in the stakeholder meetings to see how what that looks like, how that would work if there are two regions that are accessing the same entity there. So I think that's a good question to have some further conversation about. There is a question about the expected term length of time that the funding is intended to support. So the timeframes for the collaborative program extend for about 5 years, and there are some milestones that collaboratives need to hit in those time periods. So this is a multi-year process. Will there be an equity lens or focus that prioritizes K-12 districts and students of color or who live in poverty? Another good question that we are going to defer until the grant application process discussions for our stakeholder meetings in January. Question about, is this, even though it's through the Office of Public School Construction, this is not just for facilities, it's for a multitude of spending? Yes, that is correct. Typically, OPSC does only handle facilities, but this is much broader than that. So this is related to the collaboratives and the structure and assisting the students and forming those relationships. So yes, this is a little bit of a different animal for OPSC. So it will be a little bit different in that aspect.
Think of it as people infrastructure. You usually work in sort of the physical infrastructure. This is more of a people infrastructure.
Exactly. I like that. Let's see. We already have a collaborative established that closely aligns with what has been shared. Will we be able to apply even though we are already established? At this point, we don't see any limitation on that, but again, we'll take a look at that more through the grant development phase in the next few weeks. And will this recording be sent to us? Sorry, I may have skipped that one. If you signed up through Eventbrite, we can send the recording out. We did just drop it. We dropped the link to the slides in the chat. We do archive these recordings, so it will probably not immediately after this meeting, but it will be published on the K-16 Collaborative's website that we have, and you'll be able to access it from that link as well. So that will be an option there. And then, do you anticipate variable grant awards, award amounts depending on size of the collaborative? No final decision has been made on that yet. So again, great conversation for January. We are taking note of all of these as things that we definitely, things we've been thinking about, but also some things that we want to make sure we have with our stakeholders. And once we get our third-party administrator on board and have some deeper conversations about what this looks like as well. Let's see. I think we did address that one. And oops, hold on. We got a couple more coming. These are great questions. We've got a couple more coming in quick. So let's see here. Does this primarily focus on CTE or on core academics as well?
Or I mean, some of the elements that are listed in the as sort of things that the collaboratives would work on, some of them do touch on core academics. It's not just sort of career pathways work or CTE work or anything, you know, sort of that any particular bucket. But yeah, in general, that is one of the sort of core objectives, is to make sure that, you know, our education systems are aligning with career and technical sort of opportunities in the future. So it definitely overlaps substantially, but not exclusively. And actually that touches on another question that I see here around, I think it's Paulo's question around particular areas or industries. I would say, you know, there are a couple that are listed within the sort of guidelines that are posted on the OPSC website. But just in general, like as I was noting earlier, I would highly encourage trying to reach out to employers and industries in the region that are part of the sort of, you know, what people in the community believe is sort of the future for the regional economy. That'll, for example, be part of the discussion with the Community Economic Resilience Fund as well, SURF. But in addition to that, I think a big picture, what you will see and hear, if you haven't already, from our administration in terms of what we would like to see more of, I think what we see as an administration is highly necessary areas of future employment and industries include education, certainly. We all see and feel the impact of shortages on the both certificated and classified sides in our schools. So education writ large, more infrastructure, more workforce there, especially as we're building out things like TK. We will need to fuel that with qualified and well-prepared and well-supported TK teachers, for example. So I would say education is one big one. Another big one is climate. Across the board. So, you know, climate is an interesting bucket because it's really, it could span from high-tech applied research and innovation. It can also apply to, you know, skilled trades and technical work. So climate writ large is going to be an area of investment and opportunities long-term for us, unfortunately and fortunately. It is an area that we have to work together as a state to make ourselves resilient and, you know, face the future as it is coming to us and hopefully shape it. And then another area I would say is health, healthcare of all sorts. As another sort of just writ large, you should probably be engaging with those industries in your community.
Great. And I think we also have a couple raised hands. As I go to unmute here, there was one more question in there about whether this is a one-time opportunity or if we anticipate future funding. Right now, for the $250 million for the time, given the time periods on the grant, we are expecting the $250 million to be a single filing round of the funding. Okay, and we have
but as you noted earlier, I would say it's going to be over a several year term. So it's not as though it's like we're funding these relationships for 1 year and then you're done. It's going to be a multi-year period. So I think that's another note there. And who knows whether in 5 years from now, maybe it's so successful that we create, you know, ongoing investments or that sort of thing. But that's a little too far in the future for us to really project out at this point.
Great point. Marie, we have a hand up, so if you could unmute, please go forward with your question.
Thank you. This is Marie Caldwell from Siskiyou County. I know that we looked initially to the K-16 Fresno Collaborative as a model. And when I noticed their executive steering committee, it existed primarily of presidents of colleges. Being one of the last counties before you hit the Oregon border, our UC and CSUs are pretty far away. We do have lots of existing relationships with those and partnerships. But is it going to be an expectation, or is this too much of a detailed ask right now, I guess, to that the regional partnerships will be partnering and have college presidents for CSU and UC on their teams, or will other UC or CSU administration suffice?
I think, to me, like, it's an amazing question. I'll say at the top level, a non-negotiable is the fact that this is an opportunity that's available to all communities across California, including communities where there might not be as much of a presence in terms of UC or CSU campuses, sort of CSU or UC sort of facilities. But having said that, we will certainly work to make sure that this is accessible across the state. I think one takeaway I have from sort of, this whole set of Q&A and what Barbara was talking about is, at this point, what we're trying to do is help provide some of the why behind this collaborative, and hope, to me, a good next step for the folks who are here is to start making sure that, you know who you might talk to, and start setting up those meetings and start, kind of initiating that conversation. And then in that January and February period is going to be the real place where Barbara and the folks at OPSC and others are going to be, really relying on your input to figure out how do we articulate these more specific grant guidelines and applications and whatnot. And from there, we'll actually move on to applications and then grants. But the takeaway to me here is, out of this, hopefully out of this webinar, you will leave thinking, okay, I have a pretty decent sense of what the hope is with this effort, and have a decent sense of who to start conversations with, and who to kind of, where places where we need to figure out, who is our right point of contact, so to speak. Start reaching out, start those conversations, join us in January and February, input on how do we, unpack the programmatic details, and then, hopefully we'll be in next spring, summer, and be ready to, basically hit the ground running.
Yeah, and we definitely hope you all come to the stakeholder meetings. These are excellent points. So please sign up for that email list so that you can watch and find out when these are. And I think we are at time for this meeting. So my email address is also on the website. So if you have specific questions that we didn't get to today that can't wait until the stakeholder meetings, please feel free to reach out, and we will do our best to address the questions as well. With that, we really want to thank you all for taking the time today to participate in this meeting. This has been great. And we look forward to working with you all in the future. Okay, thank you. Bye, everybody.